All right, this is my second attempt at getting your Schoology video up. This is the last video for this unit. Our test again is Wednesday, so make sure we're taking notes on this stuff and ready to go. What we're going to focus on today is what political parties actually do, their role, their function, their structure, all those kind of things. What we'll see is a couple of different processes. The first is nominating candidates. It's incredibly difficult for the American population to keep track of all the people in there. How do we know that Marco Rubio is a rising candidate? How do we know that Barack Obama is the best possible person to be president from the Democratic Party? Well, part of this takes place behind closed doors with all the meetings, with the political candidates that are part of these parties. And so they nominate people along the way. They work their way up, they gain endorsements, and then eventually what we're left with is one person for each party who they recommend, if you're a Democrat or a Republican, that you vote for. The second is raising money. And again, from the game, you should have seen that this is the most difficult, most time-consuming, and most important part of what you do. It's incredibly expensive to get out the vote. It's a huge organization to try and be nationwide. It's incredibly expensive to try and keep your party machine functioning. If you think about just flying in and out of Hawaii, in and out of Ohio, in and out of California, how often our candidates are trying to get to both their local and then the national events. It's incredibly expensive just for that. Plus, not everyone that works for the campaigns is a volunteer. In addition, they help register voters. What we're talking about here is trying to get people that are likely to vote for you to actually get to the polls. This is what we talk about when we say a grassroots or boots on the ground organization. This is one of the areas that Obama definitely beat the Romney campaign. You can read about their problems with for Romney with their ORCA program, which tried to modernize this idea of strike balloting, this idea of figuring out who voted for you, who was supposed to vote for you but hasn't, and then actually driving them to and from their homes and to the polling booths. This is one of the things that the political parties and their volunteers do, especially on that last day. Fourth, they inform citizens about issues. One of the ways that we know what are the important issues, what's going on, is by the political parties' messages, their ability to fundraise, their ability to get on the local talk shows, the ability to get the media to talk about the issues that are important to them. Their most important role that they say that is this idea of the watchdog for the other party. The idea that they're there to tell us what the other party is doing wrong, to make sure we understand how the policies that the other side is pushing is going to affect us. In other words, what's the other side of the aisle say? And lastly, the idea is that this competition, this constant battling between these two parties is going to force them to listen to us. And again, we can have the debate, is this really working? Is this effective? When we talk about the problems with the Electoral College, when we talk about the debate between whether we should have a popular vote or whether the Electoral College is the best method, we see this issue of forcing competition. Are we really competing when it comes down to 15 or 11 states? When 98% of their time and money is spent on these small states, are they really listening to all of us? All right, so how do they do each of these tasks? When we talk about nominating the candidates, what we see is primary elections. And there's two different types of elections, the primary and the general. Again, think of the primary elections as this qualifying process, this Republican versus Republican or Democrat versus Democrat. Again, going back to my other analogy about the Olympics. In the Olympics, before you can go compete in London, you have to beat all of the Americans here. And that's what the primary election is. It's just like the general election in that it goes to each state, and each state has a set number of electoral votes that can be given to the candidates. There are a couple of different types of primaries. There's a direct primary. This is where each state chooses the candidate to represent the party in the general election, but the key is anyone can vote in a direct primary. You don't have to belong to a political party. And there's some problems with this. What we see is certain states, they'll see that, for example, in 2008, they thought that Obama was a weaker candidate than Hillary Clinton. So in states like Texas that had a direct primary or an open primary, they were going out and voting for Hillary Clinton. By they, I mean Republicans, because they thought that McCain could beat her. Again, two types of primaries, open and closed, and the closed one is where it's only Republicans. So, open primary, you don't need to declare your party preference. In other words, you don't have to say which side you're a part of. You just simply go out and vote. There are very few states that use this type of primary because of the gamesmanship that goes on, the idea of rigging these elections, the idea of trying to play games where you know who's going to win for your side. You want to make sure that a weaker candidate comes out from the other side. Second is a closed primary, and again, you have to be a registered Republican or a registered Democrat to vote in these primaries. This is to avoid some of those shenanigans that go on. Most states use this type. So what we can see about Mr. Colvin is I don't get to vote in primaries because I'm not a registered member of either party. This creates a problem for me in the sense that when it comes to the general election, I never get a chance to say who I think the two candidates should be. But again, that's a choice I get to make. How do we choose the party nominee? Well, it's the candidate who gains what we call a plurality. In other words, not the majority, because in a primary election, there's going to be more than two people. So we're not necessarily going to get a majority. What we'll have is 3 or 4 different candidates. And what we want to do is see who gets the most votes, not the majority. Because again, these are legal descriptions. And if we say somebody has to get a majority, then the problem is when we have 3 candidates, if nobody gets a majority, we have to continue to have election after election after election. So what we do is we have a plurality. So if there's 3 candidates and somebody gets 41, and somebody gets 30, and somebody gets 29, then the person who gets 40 votes wins. These are decided by delegates. In other words, we take the popular vote, and then they award these to delegates who represent that candidate. These delegates then go to the national convention at the end, and they vote for whoever. And sometimes we'll have backroom brokering, where we have 3 or 4 different candidates who have delegates, and they're negotiating for different things to see who they'll award their delegates to. Sometimes we will not get a majority and we need it at the national convention, and so we'll have a runoff primary. What they'll do is take the 2 candidates who got the most votes, and they'll have them go against each other. So the 3rd and 4th place candidates don't get to participate. Why do we use delegates? For the same reason that we don't use the popular election. We want it to be a simpler form of math, and we want small states to have a chance so people will actually campaign in there. We have 2 national parties, one for each of the big major parties, the RNC or Republican National Convention and the DNC, the Democratic National Convention. These parties focus on helping the party win as many offices as possible. In this last election, everyone focused on the presidential election, but to be honest, there were far more important battles taking place in the Senate and the House. And we saw at the end that nothing changed. We'll talk about gerrymandering, excuse me, and the role that played. The Republicans did not win a majority of popular votes, but won a majority in the House. And that should never happen mathematically. The way that they were able to win in the last election and gerrymander these districts allows them to win a majority of House votes, even though the House should represent the popular vote most clearly. We'll clear that up in class tomorrow. The parties at the national level are made up of representatives from each state. You work your way up. You start in your local party, and then you get elected a delegate, and then you work up to your ward, and then your precincts. Delegates work their way up to the county level, all the way up to the state, and then end up as national delegates. Again, the National Party raises money. We see that even for local elections, this is critically important. Our congressional district with Michelle Bachmann, the National Party spent tons of money in it because they knew it was going to be a very, very close election in a district that isn't usually very close. The National Convention is only held every 4 years. It coincides with the nomination for the presidential candidate from that party. The delegates from each state help write the platform, and this is the stance for the party on issues. The platform is your stance on all of the issues combined. Okay? Delegates, again, are chosen at these primary elections and in caucuses, which are just meetings. The state and local party. We divide this up just like federalism, and we have a Minnesota Republican Party and a Minnesota Democratic Party. And they work to elect local candidates in state elections. So our state Congress, our state Senate, they work to help organize all of these candidates to try and get as many people in as they can. We saw the Minnesota election where the Republicans, again, didn't fare nearly as well. And that's normal in a presidential election. Whoever tends to side with the incumbent, and if the incumbent is favorable, in this case Obama and the Democrats, they're going to gain elections at the local level. The local party organizations focus on city, town, and county committees who work to elect their candidates. These do include the party's elected officials. So the party's, the governor in this case, is the most recognizable candidate in Minnesota. That's Mark Dayton, who's a Democrat. What we see is a coalition built between state and federal, and this is that grassroots organization. In other words, starting as close to home as possible, starting at the lowest possible level. At these local levels, they propose and vote on planks, which are stances on each individual issue. So when we talk about abortion, they're going to write a plank, so it's part of the platform. Joining a political party, it's not required. You get to vote whether you join a political party, except in, hopefully you understood that, those closed primaries. But your vote counts just as much when it comes to the general election. Parties are active year-round. The parties started immediately. Think about the conversation I had about the Republicans and their change in tactics as it relates to the Hispanic vote. We're going to see a huge shift, and I would be amazed if you don't see comprehensive immigration reform, which will help. On the first hand, it will look like an obvious win for the Democrats because Obama will be able to take credit for that. But once the Republican Party says we were able to get it done and focuses on social issues where the Hispanic vote aligns closer to the Republicans, they're going to try and get that party back online. They create common space for people to make an attempt to have a larger impact. Again, Mr. Colvin can pay attention as much as he wants, be as civically active as he wants, but again, by not aligning with the political party, I have a very, very small voice. In fact, no voice. Nobody that's important is going to listen to me because I'm just one individual. Pros and cons of joining a party? Again, it depends. If a political party represents you, it gives you a chance to belong, a chance to have an identity. On the other hand, if your party does something you disagree with, you're painted with that same brush. So again, you look bad. All right, I hope you paid attention, took notes. We will be having a test on Wednesday.